everyone, welcome back to my channel. Thank you so much. I just saw I hit 50 subscribers. That's huge for me, like 50 subscribers. That may not sound like a lot to a lot of people, but that's big to me. I never expected to have that many people like tune into my channel, and I'm so thankful. I'm gonna probably do a contest or something, just because it's a big deal to me to actually hit the 50 mark. And actually we're at like 56 right now, and I would have been more like in tune with it, but I've been in the middle of a move. I have to move by the beginning of April, so excuse me. It was kind of last minute, so that's why I've been kind of like lapse on the making videos. I've been wanting to make a lot more, but unfortunately I'm in the middle of a move. But the good news is it's more insulated, so I'll have a lot less background noise. So my new apartment will be a little bit more ASMR friendly. So I hope you continue to tune in, and please bear with me during this moving time. I think it's hard for everybody to kind of do something like that during a pandemic. And as I bump the mic, I wanted to do a new reading. I got the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. It's actually all the novels here, all 5 books. And maybe we'll read a little bit from each of them. I love this series, and there's a few of the books I haven't read yet, so this can be very fun. So what I'm thinking is we can do a little bit, and if you like this, I don't mind doing readings. Just maybe I can do whisper readings of the books. It really just depends on what you want. And I'm still new to this, so any suggestions would be greatly appreciated. Again, thank you so much for tuning in and giving me the support I need. It means so much to me. You all are so awesome. This is really helping me a lot too. I'm a pretty shy person in real life, so this helps me like get out of my shell and talk more and do what do what normal humans do. Got this really nifty Bob Ross bookmark for the occasion. It says, "We don't make mistakes, we just have happy accidents." And I actually went to do the Bob Ross experience in Muncie, Indiana. It was really cool. I'm gonna put a video up of that. You can actually see his paintings in real life, and not on like a TV show, so it was nice to see them up front, up close. So with all of my readings, I like to kind of just light a candle or two, so do a little match. Got the candle here. We'll put one right over here. I'm kind of filming in my closet, so you probably won't see the candles like I did before, so. Okay, without any further ado, let's start the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy as I drop everything. And we'll move past the forward here. Okay. small end of the western spiral arm of the galaxy lies a small, unregarded yellow sun. Orbiting this at the distance of roughly 98 million miles is an utterly insignificant little blue-green planet whose ape-descended life forms are amazingly primitive, that they still think digital watches are a pretty neat idea. This planet has, or rather had, a problem, which was this. Most of the people living on it were unhappy for pretty much all the time. Many solutions were suggested for this problem, but most of these were largely concerned with the movements of small green pieces of paper, which is odd, because on the whole it wasn't the small green pieces of paper that were unhappy. And so the problem remained. Lots of the people were mean, and most of them were miserable, and even the ones with digital watches. Many were increasingly of the opinion that they'd all make a big mistake in coming down from the trees in the first place, and some even said that even the trees had been a bad move, and that no one should ever have left the oceans. I'm gonna have to take my glasses off because my glasses are for not reading. So let's do that. And then one Thursday, nearly 2,000 years after one man had been nailed to a tree for saying how great it would be to be nice to people for a change and get a girl sitting on her own in a small cafe in Workmansworth, suddenly realized what it was that had been going wrong all this time. She finally knew how the world could be made a good place and happy. This time it was right, it will work, and no one would have to get nailed to anything. Sadly, however, before she can get to the phone and tell everyone about it, a terrible, stupid catastrophe happened, and the idea was lost forever. This is not her story, but it is the story of that terrible, stupid catastrophe and some of its consequences. It is also the story of a book called The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, not an Earth book, never published on Earth, and until the terrible catastrophe occurred, never seen or even heard of by any Earthman. Nevertheless, a wholly remarkable book. In fact, it was probably the most remarkable book ever to come out of the great publishing corporations of Ursa Minor, of which no Earthman had ever heard either. Not only was it a wholly remarkable book, it had also a bigly successful one, and more popular than the Celestial Home Care Omnibus, better selling than 53 More Things to Do in Zero Gravity, and more controversial than Ulan Kulit's trilogy of philosophical blockbusters, where God went wrong and some more of God's greatest mistakes, and who is this God person anyway? And many of the more relaxed civilizations on the outer eastern rim of the galaxy. The Hitchhiker's Guide has already supplanted the great Encyclopedia Galactica as the standard repository of all knowledge and wisdom. For though it has many omissions and contains much, or at least wildly inaccurate, it goes over the older, more pedestrian work in two important respects. First, it is slightly cheaper, and second, it has the words "Don't Panic" inscribed in large friendly letters on its cover. But the story of this terrible, stupid Thursday, the story of the extraordinary consequences, and the story of how these consequences are inextricably intertwined with this remarkable book begins very simply. It begins with a house. Deep breath. Don't panic. The house stood on a slight rise just on the edge of a village. It stood on its own and looked out over a broad spread of West Country farmland. not a remarkable house by any means. It was about 30 years old, squattish, squirrelish, made of brick, and had 4 windows set in the front of a size and proportion of which more or less exactly filled to please the eye. The only person for whom the house was in any way special was Arthur Dent, and that was only because it happened to be the one he lived in. He had lived in it for about 3 years, ever since he had moved out of London, because it made him nervous and irritable. He was about 30 as well, tall, dark-haired, and never quite at ease with himself. The thing that used to worry him most was the fact that people always used to ask him what he was looking so worried about. He worked in a local radio, which he always used to tell his friends was a lot more interesting than they probably thought. It was too. Most of his friends worked in advertising. On Wednesday night, it had rained very heavily. The lane was wet and muddy. But the Thursday morning sun was bright and clear, and it shone on Arthur Dent's house for what it was like to be the last time. It hadn't properly registered yet with Arthur that the council wanted to knock it down and build a bypass instead. At 8 o'clock on Thursday morning, Arthur didn't feel very good. He woke up. Blearily, he got up, wandered blearily around his room, opened a window and saw a bulldozer, found his slippers, and stomped off to the bathroom to wash. Toothpaste on brush, soap, scrub. A shaving mirror pointing to the ceiling. He adjusted it. For the moment, it reflected a second bulldozer through the bathroom window. Properly adjusted, it reflected Arthur Dent's bristles. He shaved them off, washed, dried, and stomped off to the kitchen to find some pleasant to put in his mouth. Kettle, plug, fridge, milk, coffee, yawn. The word bulldozer wandered through his mind for a moment in search of something to connect with. The bulldozer outside the kitchen window was quite a big one. He stared at it. Yellow, he thought. He stomped off back to his bedroom to get dressed. Passing the bedroom, he stopped to drink a large glass of water and another. He began to suspect that he was hungover. Why was he hungover? Had he been drinking the night before? He supposed that he must have been. He caught a glint in the shaving mirror. Yellow, he thought, and stomped off to the bedroom. He stood and thought. The bub, he thought. Oh dear, the bub. He vaguely remembered being angry. Angry about something that seemed important. He'd been telling people about it in great length. He'd rather suspected his clearless visual recollection was of glazed looks on other people's faces. Something about a new bypass he'd just found out about. It had been in the pipeline for months, only no one seemed to have known about it. Ridiculous. He took a swig of the water. It would sort itself out. He decided no one wanted a bypass. The council didn't have a leg to stand on. It would sort itself out. God, what a terrible hangover it had earned. It earned him, though. When he looked at himself in the wardrobe mirror, he stuck out his tongue. Yellowish, he thought. The word yellow wandered through his mind in search of something to connect with. 15 seconds later, he was out of the house and lying in front of a big yellow bulldozer that was advancing up on his garden path. Mr. L. Prosser was, as they say, only human. In other words, he was a carbon-based bipedal life form descended from the ape. More specifically, he was 40, fat and shabby, and worked for the local council. Curiously enough, though, he didn't know it. He was also a direct male line descendant of Genghis Khan, though intervening generations of racial mixing had so juggled his genes that he had no discernible Mongoloid characteristics, and the only vestiges left of Mr. L. Prosser of his mighty ancestry were a pronounced stoutness about the tongue and a predilection for little fur hats. He was by no means a great warrior. In fact, he was a nervous, worried man. Today he was particularly nervous and worried because something had gone seriously wrong with his job. which was to see that Arthur Dent's house got cleared out of the way before the day was out. "Come off it, Mr. Dent," he said. "You can't win, you know. You can't lie in front of the bulldozer indefinitely." He tried to make his eyes blaze fiercely, but they just wouldn't do it. Arthur lay in the mud and squelched at him. "I'm game," he said. "We'll see who runs first." "I'm afraid you're going to have to accept it," said Mr. Prosser, gripping it at his fur hat and rolling it around the top of his head. "This bypass has got to be built, and it's going to be built." First I've heard of it, said Arthur. "Why has it got to be built?" Mr. Prosser shook his finger at him for a bit and then stopped to put it away again. "What do you mean? Why it's got to be built?" he asked. "It's a bypass. You've got to build bypasses. Bypasses are devices that allow some people to dash from point A to point B very fast, while other people dash from point B to point A very fast. People living at point C, being the point directly in between, are often given to wonder what's so great about point A, that so many people from point B are so keen to get there, and what's so great about point B, that so many people from point A are so keen to get there. They often wish that people would just once for all work out where the hell they wanted to be. Mr. Prosser wanted to be at point D. Point D wasn't anywhere in particular. It was just a convenient point, a very long way from point A, point B, and C. He would have a nice little cottage at point D with X's over the doors, and spend a pleasant amount of time at point E, which would be the nearest pub to point D. His wife, of course, wanted climbing roses, but he wanted X's. He didn't know why, he just liked X's. He flushed hotly under the derisive grins of the bulldozer drivers. He shifted his weight from one foot to the other, but it was equally uncomfortable on each. Obviously someone had been appallingly incompetent, and he'd hoped to God it wasn't him. Mr. Prosser said, "You are quite entitled to make any suggestions or protests at the appropriate time, you know." "Appropriate time?" hooted out Arthur. "Appropriate time? The first I knew about it was when the workmen arrived at my house yesterday. I asked him if he'd gone to clean the windows, and he said no, he'd come to demolish the house. He didn't tell me straight away, of course. Oh no, first he wiped a couple of windows and charged me $5. Then he told me. But Mr. Dent, the plans have been available in the local planning office for the last 9 months. Oh yes, well, as soon as I heard, I went straight around to see them. Yesterday afternoon. You hadn't exactly gone out of your way to call attention to them, had you? I mean, like actually telling anybody or anything. But the plans were on display. I eventually had to go down to the cellar to find them. That's the display department. With a flashlight. Well, the lights had probably gone. So at the stairs. But look, you found those, didn't you? Yes, said Arthur. Yes, I did. It was on display in the bottom of the locked filing cabinet, stuck in a disused lavatory with a sign on the door saying, "Beware of the leopard." A cloud passed overhead. It cast a shadow on Arthur Dent as he lay propped up again on his elbow in the cold mud. It cast a shadow over Arthur Dent's house. Mr. Prosser frowned at it. "It's not as if it's a particularly nice house," he said. "I'm sorry, but I happen to like it." "You'll like the bypass." "Oh, shut up," said Arthur Dent. "Shut up and go away, and take your bloody bypass with you. You haven't got a leg to stand on, and you know it." Mr. Prosser's mouth opened and closed a couple times while his mind was, for the moment, filled with inexplicable but terribly attractive visions of Arthur Dent's house being consumed with fire, and Arthur himself running screaming from the blazing ruin with at least Mr. Prosser's mouth opened and closed a couple times while his mind was at Mr. Prosser's mouth opened and closed a couple of times while his mind was for a moment filled with inexplicable but terribly attractive visions of Arthur Dent's house being consumed with fire, and Arthur's himself running screaming from the blazing ruin with at least 3 hefty spears protruding from his back. Mr. Prosser was often bothered with visions like these, and they made factual information for you. Have you any idea how much damage that bulldozer would suffer if I just let it roll straight over you? How much? Said Arthur. None at all, said Mr. Prosser, and stormed nervously off, wondering why his brain was filled with 1,000 hairy horsemen all shouting at him. By a curious coincidence, none at all is exactly how much suspicion the ape-descended Arthur had that one of his closest friends was not descended from an ape, but was in fact from a smaller planet somewhere in the vicinity of Beetlejuice, and not from Guildford, as he usually claimed. Arthur Dent had never ever suspected this. This friend of his had first arrived on the planet Earth some 15 Earth years previously, and he had worked hard to blend himself into Earth society. With it must be said, some success. For instance, he had spent those 15 years pretending to be an out-of-work actor, which was plausible enough. He had made one careless blunder, though, because he had skimped a bit on the preparatory speech. The information he had gathered had led him to choose the name Ford Perfect as being nicely inconspicuous. He was not conspicuously tall. His features were striking, but not conspicuously handsome. His hair was wiry and gingerish, and brushed backwards from the temples. His skin seemed to be pulled backwards from the nose. There was something very slightly odd about him, but it was difficult to say what it was. Perhaps it was his eyes seemed to blink often enough, and when you talked to him for any length of time, your eyes began involuntarily to water on his behalf. Perhaps it was that he smiled slightly too broadly and gave people an unnerving impression that he was about to go for their neck. He struck most of the friends he had made on Earth as eccentric, but a harmless one, and a whirly boozer with some oddest habits. For instance, he would often gate crash university parties, get badly drunk, and start making fun of any astrophysicist they could find until he got thrown out. Sometimes he would get seized with oddly distracted moods and stare into the sky as if hypnotized until someone asked him what he was doing. Then he would just stare guiltily at it for a moment, relax, and grin. Oh, just looking at flying saucers, he would joke, and everyone would laugh and ask him what sort of flying saucers he was looking for. Green ones, he would reply with a wicked grin, laugh wildly for a moment, and then suddenly lunge for the nearest bar and buy an enormous round of drinks. Evenings like this usually ended badly. Ford would get out his skull on whiskey. Let's go back. Evenings like this usually ended badly. Ford would get out of his skull on whiskey, huddle in a corner with some girl, and explain to her in slurred phrases that honestly the color of the flying saucers didn't matter that much really. Thereafter, staggering semi-paralytic down the night streets, he would often ask passing policemen if they knew the way to Beetlejuice. The policeman would usually say something like, "Don't you think it's about time you went off home, sir?" "I'm trying to, baby, I'm trying to," is what Ford invariably replied on these occasions. In fact, what he was really looking for when he stared distractedly into the sky was any kind of flying saucer at all. The reason he had said green was that green was the traditional space livery of Beetlejuice trading scouts. Ford Perfect was desperate for that flying saucer at all would arrive soon, because 15 years was a long time to get stranded anywhere, particularly somewhere as mind-bogglingly dull as the Earth. Ford wished that a flying saucer would arrive soon because he knew how to flag flying saucers down and get lifts from them. He knew how to see the marvels of the universe for less than $30 Altarian a day. In fact, Ford Perfect was a roving researcher for the wholly remarkable book, The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. We have a title. Human beings are great adapters, and by lunchtime, life in the environs of Arthur's house had settled into a steady routine. It is Arthur's accepted role to lie sculptingly in the mud, making occasional demands to see his lawyer, his mother, or a good book. It was Mr. Prosser's accepted role to tackle Arthur with the occasional new ploy, such as for the public good talk or the march of progress talk. They knocked my house down once, never look back talk, and various other counterfeits and threats. And it was the bulldozer's driver accepted role to sit around drinking coffee and experimenting with evening regulations to see how they could turn the situation to their financial advantage. The earth moved slowly in its diurnal course. The sun was beginning to dry out the mud that Arthur lay in. A shadow moved across him again. "Hello, Arthur," said the shadow. Arthur looked up and, squinting into the sun, was startled to see Ford Perfect standing above him. "Ford, hello, how are you?" "Fine," said Ford. "Look, are you busy?" Am I busy?" exclaimed Arthur. "Well, I've just got all these bulldozers and things to lie in front of because they're gonna knock down my house if I don't. But other than that, well, no, not especially. Why?" You don't have sarcasm on Beetlejuice, and Ford Perfect often failed to notice it unless he was concentrating. He said, "Good. Is there anywhere we can talk?" "What?" said Arthur then. For a few seconds, Ford seemed to ignore him and stared fixatingly into the sky like a rabbit trying to get run over by a car, and suddenly squatted down beside Arthur. "We've got to talk," he said urgently. "Fine," said Arthur. "Talk." "And drink," said Ford. "It's vitally important that we talk and drink now. We'll go to the pub in the village." He looked into the sky, again nervous, expectant. "Look, don't you understand?" shouted Arthur. He pointed at Prosser. "That man wants to knock my house down." Ward glanced at the man, puzzled. "Well, he can do it while you're away, can't he?" "Yes, but I don't want him to." "Look, what's the matter with you, Ford?" said Arthur. Nothing's the matter. Listen to me. I've got to tell you about the most important thing you've ever heard. I've got to tell you now, and I've got to tell you in the saloon bar of the house and groom." "But why?" "Because you're going to need a very stiff drink." Ford stared at Arthur, and Arthur was astonished to find his will beginning to weaken. He didn't realize that this was because of an old drinking game that Ford learned to play in the hyperspace ports and served the Madronite mining belts in the star system of Orion Beta. The game was not unlike the Earth's game called Indian Wrestling and was played like this. Two contestants would sit either side of the table with a glass in front of each of them. Between them would be a placed bottle of Jenks spirit, as immortalized in the ancient Orion mining song. "Oh, don't give me none more than that old Jenks spirit. No, don't you give me none more than old Jenks spirit. For my head will fly, my tongue will fly, my eyes will fry, and I may die. Won't you pour me one of that sinful old Jenks spirit?" Each of the two contestants would then concentrate their will on the bottle and attempt to tip it and pour the spirit in the glass of his opponent, who would then have to drink it. The bottle would then be refilled. The game would be played again and again. Once you started to lose, you would probably keep losing, because one of the effects of Jenks spirit is to depress telepsychic power. As soon as the predetermined quantity had been consumed, the final loser would have to perform a forfeit, which would usually obviously biological. Ford Perfect usually played to lose. Okay, so I'm gonna stop right there. We've read 14 pages. If you'd like me to read more of The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, please let me know. I hope you like it, and again, thank you so much for supporting my channel and allowing me to hit 50 subscribers. It's just amazing. Oh my gosh, I mean, seriously, you guys are awesome. If you have any requests or ideas, please let me know, and what I might do is I might choose a random comment, and the person who I choose, I will take a suggestion for an ASMR video. And again, thank you. And if there's any books or anything you want me to read, that's cool too. I can look at that. and I will have more videos soon, I promise. I have to move in a couple of weeks, so if there's a lapse, don't give up on me yet. There'll be a whole slew of videos coming soon. Alright, take care. Thank you so much. Bye.